Hi, I'm Bill Holcomb and thanks for joining me for today's mountain landscape watercolor tutorial. Here is a list of the materials used in this painting. The location for this painting is the Grand Teton mountain range in Wyoming. I start with a wash of Windsor blue from the top of the painting using a mop sized brush about a number 20. Come down to the top of the mountains. Just do that as carefully as possible, following the ridge. Then whilst that is wet, we'll add some stronger version of the Windsor blue. Now here I can switch to something like a 10 or 12 brush and I can start mopping up some of the excess pigment at the top of the mountains. You can do that as I'm demonstrating by using a tissue to dry the brush and then run that over the excess liquid pigment, and the brush will soak it up. And I've stayed with that smaller size round brush to finish off the sky. Dry that with a hairdryer as usual. Then you can have a mixture of something like a light red and the Windsor blue for the shadows on the mountain range. Sometimes it's worth dropping in shadows first to then see the structure of the particular subject matter in the painting. And that's what I'm doing on this occasion. And you'll notice later that when I lay down the colour of the rocks on the mountain, the surface, that we can go over those shadow areas. I would be using a smaller round brush at this stage, something like a number 4 or 5. So once the shadows have been laid in, you can use your light red with perhaps a little bit of the blue, get a brownish colour, but keeping it as light as possible. You can add some Windsor yellow to it as well. And then you can do the lighter part of the mountains, going over the shadow areas as mentioned before. And I'm avoiding the tree area to the right in particular, which we'll be painting in later. To the left, there's a further rocky area, which is very much in shadow. So lay the shadow colour over that first. You'll see as well here and there, I've left some little white areas, which is the paper, on the mountain range to depict little pockets of snow, mainly at the top. Dry that off with your hairdryer as usual. Then you can lay in some of the green. Use your small brush again, 4 or 5. And as usual, you start with your lighter green wash, perhaps your Windsor yellow and some sap green, Windsor blue if necessary, to vary the colours. And drop that in, and later we'll be dropping in the darker version. And we'll also be using later a little bit of the scraping technique with the side of the brush to show the foliage more realistically. So here it's still a little bit of wet in wet going on at this stage with the darker green. And you'll see that because the light is from the right, we cast shadows on the left, and therefore, as on the mountain range, in these trees and bushes, we have the same principle. Lay those in and break them up to add to the realism, and it's starting to dry, so we'll get more and more into the scraping technique. And here now we've gone to the darker version, and I'm definitely using the side of the brush to scrape in the foliage. And you'll see that this is a very effective method to achieve trees and bushes, and it's even used on mountain ranges to scrape in rock formations and so forth. Later on, we'll be using it as well for grass area. You will see later that I don't demonstrate the painting of the bears because I have other tutorials that you'll find on my channel. I have quite a few of them for painting bears, and you can refer to those. Then I've carefully studied the various structure combinations of the barn with the various wood slats going one way, then another way, etc. And followed that pattern to make it as realistic to the original as possible. Using a much smaller brush, you lay your underpainting in first, the light brownish colour, with something like a 4 brush or a 5, but then drop down to your 2 brush to do the detail of the wood. Then for the grass, we start with the distant grass first, making that as light as possible. I've got a number 12 brush at the moment because it's got a nice point to it. You might choose a much smaller brush at this stage, which is fine, as if you do so, then you're more likely to achieve accuracy. So painting around the bears with that light grass underpainting colour first. I'm just avoiding the trunk of the tree on the left, which we'll be painting in later. And also there's a little bit of path leading up to the doorway of the barn. That's a nice bright yellow colour as an underpainting. Then you can add sap green to your mixture to darken it up, and perhaps some winter blue. And whilst that's wet, do wet in wet to fuse those colours together. Dry that off, and then with your hairdryer, and then you can do the tree, so the main trunk and the various branches. You could use your 4 or 5, or even drop down to the 2 brush for the various small limbs. You don't have to slavishly follow a certain shape, just make it up. And then once that's done, you can paint the main trunk of the tree. You can do a mixture of your light red and the blue, and perhaps some yellow to get your brown colour. And once again, with the light from the right casting shadows on the left, we pay attention to that when doing the tree. Then I'm using the side of the brush scraping technique again with the number 5 brush, starting with the lighter colour for the foliage. So shape up the tree. I'm showing lots of gaps on purpose, and that makes it more interesting. And then I would have dropped in some darker colour at the end, still using the scrape technique. Then for the foreground here, I've gone to a flat brush so that I maintain better control, because I want to indicate grass, lots of thick grass. And as you can see, I'm using the side of the brush. This is a half-size flat brush. As we go further into the distance, I tap much more lightly, have less pigment on the brush, so that I can achieve realism in terms of the grass being much smaller and less detailed in the distance. It would also be slightly lighter in the distance. I'm just remembering that little pathway leading up to the barn, which is a lighter colour, so I painted grass around it. And you will see that there is shadow to the left of the barn, and I will be dropping in some shadow on the grass, which is a dark green colour. And here is the finished painting. I hope you've enjoyed that. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.